Welcome to my little culture shock. This is your host Sabrina. I am very excited to be here with you for the very first episode of our show. Just like the first time for everything else, I would like to make today's show a little bit special. In today's show, we'll take you on a journey to discover what my little culture shock is all about. In particular, we'll examine the keywords in our show title. We will bring you a piece of fun cultural trait in the middle session, followed by a discussion of a personal experience of culture shock. The world has become more globally interconnected, and nations across the world become increasingly multicultural. Therefore, whether it is at work, at school, or in their private lives, individuals must be able to effectively deal with cultural differences. Particularly in Canberra, where diverse culture has become a new type of culture. Here at CMS, we want to be proud of us embracing multiculturalism. At the same time, we understand it is not always that easy to hold a complete positive attitude towards a new culture. I would like to show you the definition of culture shock. So what is a culture shock? You may ask. Culture shock is an experience a person may have when someone moves to a cultural environment which is different from one's own. It is also the personal disorientation a person may feel when experiencing an unfamiliar way of life due to immigration or a visit to a new country, a move between social environment, or simply transition to another type of life. Culture shock means more than that initial feeling of strangeness you get when you land in a different country for a short holiday. It is actually a set of very powerful emotional and physical effects that result from moving to another country in a long term. Khalil Berg was an expert studying people and culture in Canada. He first proposed his model of cultural adjustment in 1954. There are 5 stages described in his model. The first stage is the honeymoon stage. During this period, the differences between the old and new culture are seen in a romantic light. For example, in moving to a new country, an individual might love the new food, the pace of life, and the culture's habits. During the first few weeks, most people are fascinated by the new culture. They associate with nations who speak their language and who are polite to their foreigners. Like most honeymoon period, this stage will eventually end. The second stage is negotiation stage. After some time, usually around 3 months, depending on the individual, differences between the old and new culture become more obvious and may create some anxiety. Excitement may eventually give way to unpleasant feelings of frustration and anger. As one continues to experience unfavorable events that may be perceived as strange and offensive to one's culture. Language barriers, differences in public hygiene, traffic safety, food quality may heighten the sense of disconnection from the surroundings. While being transferred into a different environment puts special pressure on communication skills, there are practical difficulties to overcome, such as routine change that often leads to sleeping problem and daylight tiredness, adaptation to new food and water, difficulty in seeking treatment for illness, as the medicines may have different names from each culture, and some active ingredients may be hard to recognize. Still, the most important change in negotiation stage is communication. People adjusting to a new culture often feel quite lonely and homesick because they are not yet used to the new environment and meet people with who are not familiar with. The language barrier might become a major obstacle in creating new relationships. Special attention must be paid to one's and others' culture-specific body languages, conversation, and tones. In the case of students studying abroad, some developed additional symptoms of loneliness that ultimately might affect their lifestyle as a whole. Due to the strain of living in a different country without parental support, international students feel quite anxious and feel more pressure while adjusting to the new cultures. The third stage is adjustment. Again, after some time, usually 6 to 12 months, one gets used to the new culture and develops new routines. One knows what to expect in most situations, and the host country no longer feels all that new. Things have become more normal to them. One starts to develop problem-solving skills for dealing with the culture and begin to accept the culture's way with a positive attitude. The culture begins to make sense, and negative reactions and responses to the culture are reduced. The fourth stage is adaptation. In the mastery stage, individuals are able to participate fully and comfortably in the host culture. Mastery does not mean total conversion. People often keep many traits from their own earlier culture, such as accents and languages. It is often referred to as the biculture stage. The last stage is re-entry shock. You have finished being in another country and it is time to say goodbye to your new friends and move back home. Or perhaps you are staying permanently in your new country, but you are going back home for a little visit. The first thing you may notice when you go back is a sense of dislocation and isolation. You may feel emotionally detached, and everything that was once familiar and now is all new and strange. You may find yourself criticizing your own culture or having difficulty connecting to people. Now, those were our first encounter of the term culture shock. We'll take a short break and come back to explain how culture shock is related to our show. Welcome to my little culture shock. In the first session of the show, we examined the term culture shock. We went into detail on what the 5 stages of culture shock look like. In this session, we are going to discuss how the meaning culture shock apply to our show in general and specifically to our very first episode for today. As you always understand, the word culture refers to a country's customs, habits, and traditions, and we'll be learning new interesting culture facts in our show. However, our show is not just limited to all that extensive cultural knowledge. What we also like to focus on in our show is your interpretation of your own culture shock. Just as the name suggested, it can be as little as any new things that happen to you during the day or during the week. The culture here does not just only apply to a broad culture that is far away from you. It can be your own individual culture that you form within you or within your own family or friendship group. It can be an experience, a feeling, or just a thought. For example, I am having a bit of culture shock myself talking to you right now. This is all new to both you and me, and we need to discover our own ways to achieve a common ground, that you understand what I say here, and I need to come up with engaging content to ensure you stay tuned in. In terms of today's show in particular, we will hope that we are in this honeymoon stage from the 5 stages of culture shock model. As it is our very first show, I am having butterflies in my tummy, feeling with tons of excitement. At the meantime, we are exploring what we might bring to you in our show. This feeling of uncertainty and nervousness kind of motivate our team to want to try out different approaches to present our show. In later time, we might come across disagreement or disengagement, but just as the culture stages suggested, our goal is to achieve a deep connection with you, and we can move forward with all your participation and involvement. Okay, let's take another short break. We'll come back with one piece of fun culture trait. Welcome to my little culture shock. This is your host Sabrina. The fun culture trait that I am bringing to you today is that many people in China like to wear pajamas in public. While it may be considered a fashion disaster in the West, people walk on the street in their sleepwear in China is more common than you would think. People often feel they don't need to change out their pajamas if they are just making a short trip to the local shops or the supermarket. You may spot people in pajamas when they take the rubbish out, grab a breakfast, or even a quick school drop-off. As many people do that, it has become a unique culture in some parts of China. So, what do you think? With a prolonged lockdown and working from home situation, are you tempted to get all that comfortable and leaving the house with your warm and cozy pajamas? Welcome back to my little culture shock. This is your host Sabrina. Thank you so much for tuning in our very first episode of my little culture shock. Earlier in the show, we examined the term culture shock. We look at the 5 stages of culture shock. We explain how the name culture shock underpins our show. In this session, we are sharing one aspect of personal experience of culture shock. Now, this is my co-host Paul.
Hi, everyone.
You may hear him in most discussion sessions in our show.
Oh, hi everyone, I'm Paul.
Thank you so much for joining in today. So this is our very first discussion session of my little culture shock. We usually talk about the recent cultural event that impact our life. In relation to what we explained earlier on, I thought we'll talk about the current new culture we have recently formed. Well, just a little bit of hint, in the future show, we might also discuss some, other foreign cultures and things like that. But everybody understand we are in a very special time that we are actually forming this new type of culture of all stay at home in combating the coronavirus situation. So that's what we want to discuss today with the new culture that coronavirus has brought to you in terms of our life changes and how we live our life and how we interact with others. So the first stage, as described in the culture shock stage, is the honeymoon stage. So I want to ask you, Paul, with the coronavirus situation, we all first heard about it early this year. It first started from overseas, and then in Australia locally, cases start to rise. And then the government had to implement some restrictions, such as keep 1.5 meters away from each other, and the health experts suggest stay at home to keep distance with other people and wash your hand regularly, and then gather in small groups. And then later on, when the situation was getting worse, all of a sudden, we got into lockdown period. So then this type of new culture started where people had to all work from home, not able to see their family and friends that regularly, have to keep this isolation. And when you first heard the news that, things are changing, do you feel a sense of honeymoon stage, or you have a different kind of reaction?
I definitely had a honeymoon stage, Sabrina. When all the restrictions started happening, it was very exciting and I was very curious about what this all meant. It was almost like we're getting ready when it was for work at home. Someone like me who's always outside working, to be working at home sounded like almost like, oh, great, this is going to be a bit of a holiday, almost. And everything was going to be exciting and new at home. I would be, working from at home with my kids around me because they can't go to school, and I thought that would be great. And there'd be all these kind of new experiences that I wouldn't get otherwise. And really, this would, I believe, change how I see the world forever.
Yeah, I guess the key of having this honeymoon stage, experiencing the honeymoon stage, is because you don't know everything yet. Things haven't started to really happen, and you are really guessing lots of things. You are imagining lots of things. For people who are quite positive, they might picture lots of great things they can do. Wow, this is a new change. This is so exciting, and it is quite common that people find new things really exciting, and people sort of have this like motivation, wanting to find out more about it. Yeah, so the honeymoon stage. So for me, when I first heard, things are changing, all of a sudden we're no longer going to school, going to work, really have to limit your social gathering, shouldn't go to the shops anymore. I would say, yeah, just like you, I was quite curious of what this new norm might bring to my life. If I was to stay at home, there are lots of things I could be doing at home. I could catch up on lots of housework or lots of new hobbies I can do. So I was feeling quite excited, and I was actually quite happy that there was a new type of culture that is coming to me. Yeah.
And when you get that excitement, it's a great idea to use that energy to connect with the new things around you. Personally, I was thinking about learning music and teaching the kids music, something that I wouldn't normally be motivated to do as much, and it was really a lot of positivity at the beginning.
Yeah, that's very good to know. However, just as the 5 stages suggested, the honeymoon stage is quite short-lived. That kind of excitement is, all of a sudden happen. And then when you have to live in this new norm for a long period of time, you really start to realize that things are different. This is when you start to feel the differences. And just as the stages suggested, the second stage has lots of frustration and lots of disconnection, because you start to really feel the differences all of a sudden.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so true, Sabrina. The following the honeymoon, it puts you on a bit of a high, and I guess all things that go up must come down, and you start noticing things that frustrate you more, or that you miss. For a lot of people, they had to make their own coffee at home rather than buy the brewed coffee. And with instant coffee, it's not really the same thing. Most coffee people would agree.
Yeah, interesting. Tell us more about what happened to you at this frustration stage.
Well, it was frustrating feeling a bit locked in your house. Normally there's a time to go outside and feel the fresh air and see other people, which the body or the mind started missing a lot. And I did feel a little bit depressed and anxious about that. What I'd say is that it with moving between the honeymoon stage and this sort of feeling of a bit of hostility to the environment around me, it's not a sudden movement. It kind of moves slowly. And with me, I definitely miss riding my bike to work. That was that sense of me. Now I just got out of bed and sort of stayed in the house all day, and there was some kind of missing feeling of achievement or missing feeling of productivity, and missing my work colleagues, the general chats we used to have. Those things really I missed.
Yeah, exactly. Because all the things you missed were the things that you were so used to for a long period of time. I guess it is quite easy for people to really give up to what they used to for a short period of time, to really enter this honeymoon stage, to really feel the excitement of everything is new and everything is so interesting. However, they will have to go back to realize that, I wasn't behaving this way in the past. I have been doing things in a certain way for a number of years, and then all of a sudden, why this is all new? So you sort of your emotion or your physical part start to really fight with this new norm, start to really question and also doubt will come out, and that will bring lots of negativity into adapting this new type of culture. And this is actually the most difficult part in terms of experiencing a culture shock. So looking back, do you find any tips if you have to leave that stage again? How would you help yourself to really survive that second stage of frustration?
Well, you definitely got to keep up your social conversations. So call your friends, have a chat to them how they're going, explain how you're feeling. Even if it's a pretty boring conversation, you're reaching out and you're getting a feel for how other people are reacting, and you know you're not necessarily alone in this situation. In fact, you might be much better off than some other people. Go.
Exactly. When you get to talk to a friend and they share the similar feeling to you, that really bring you feel the sense of familiarity, that you are no longer on your own. So that will be really helpful to help you with the feeling of feeling all frustrated and feeling all alone. And this is specifically a very good example in this situation where the social distancing has to apply, and you might be quite isolated. So getting connected with others is really crucial.
And that's why the psychologists and the mental health experts were so worried about this situation. This was the stage of the culture shock they're most worried about, because people are going to be feeling symptoms of anxiety and depression.
Yeah. What other tips did you have to help you to survive the stage 2 if you had to go over again?
Well, it's a good chance to slow down and reflect on what your priorities and values are. Some things have slowed down. For most people, work has slowed down, and you can stop and think a little bit. Okay, I should be prioritizing this part of my family. I should be prioritizing this part of my life. And it's been a great pause for some people. Some people are just busy all the time, and now they're being forced to stop.
Yeah, so that means you have to, it's almost like to reset your life. You get to, it's a good opportunity for you to really reflect on what's important to you, and you can reevaluate what your true value is in terms of how you may experience a new culture.
Absolutely. My beliefs have been strengthened during this period. I've been able to really focus on things that matter most. I'm doing less idle kind of investigations and really focusing on my passions, which is, working with my son, helping him learn. I've been doing that homeschooling role, and it's been feeling so fulfilling.
Yeah, so even though you are experiencing lots of frustration, however, you might still find, or even though the differences I am having, this type of new culture I am having, might give you an opportunity to really bring you something else even more positive. Yeah, that's a very good tip. Any other tips that help you to survive this stage of frustration?
Well, keep yourself informed about the situation. So do listen to what the government and the health experts are saying. It'll make you, even though the news is not always what you want to hear, at least you'll have the certainty about what is going on out there.
Yeah.
You really see people who are not tuned in to the official media, and they're more tuned in to, say, conspiracy theories or wild theories. They're really being exposed right now that they're not, these people just don't listen to the official channels as much as others, and they got some wild ideas.
Yeah.
So please listen to the official information more than ever in this time.
Yeah, so that is really important in terms of helping you to reduce a sense of frustration, because you might find in the end that all those new things you are experiencing, they might not even real. So to really get the credible source, get the truth, get the real news from the right place, it really help you to distinguish, what new things are actually coming to you, rather than stay there, keep guessing and guessing the worst and feeling more frustration. Okay, now moving to the third stage is things are getting a little bit better. You sort of experience the lowest time, and then you come back, you decided to, oh well, that's what's happening to me. I am slowly getting used to this. So I'm not quite sure what stage you are now, but have you felt that stage in terms of this new cultural experience?
Yes, I've been adjusting my behaviors to make sure that I do a little bit of exercise in the house. I'm not riding my bike outside, so I'm adjusted by doing some weights in the house. Those kind of gradual adjustments is a very small thing, but I'm adjusting to that. I also am doing the with my friends, I'm doing video chatting, and that is a new way of adjusting to seeing your friends. So that's a way that I've been adapting. These things sound very small, and they were always sort of, you could always do them, but now they're more important than ever.
Yeah, that's exactly true. For the adjustment stage, you are not just adjusting to the culture, that this new culture that brought to you, but you are also adjusting things according to what type of lifestyle you really want to pursue in terms of living in this new type of culture. So when you adjust, I really like how you have the tips you have. They are all very positive tips. They are not only to really go, oh yeah, I accept it, but also you actually make lots of positive outcomes out of the situation.
That's right. So whenever there's a crisis, there's an opportunity, and your opportunity here is immense. And digital technologies have been a real focus of this period, of people in their house having to use them. People are learning to use microphones and cameras more. The knowledge about the etiquette on a video call to follow is a lot more.
Yeah.
And it's people have been trying to adjust, and they've been ordering new electronic products, but finding it actually, some people have been finding that very frustrating, to waiting for their deliveries to arrive.
Yeah, so with the adjustment, just as you mentioned, and same with what we learned earlier on, is people start to really develop new skills in dealing with the new culture, and become to accept the culture in a way with a more positive attitude. So that's really bring us to lots of hope, and people could be assured that even though you have the frustration, but that will be the worst you get, and you will eventually come to another stage where you become used to it, and you start to see changes as an opportunity, rather than just all the difficulties and frustration. And then after the adjustment stage, we come to the adaptation stage. So you are quite used to the new changes, and you become so good at living this type of new life. So have you entered the type of stage yet? Or what do you think of this stage?
Well, I think this stage is where you're accepting some things as a bit of a permanent reality. And this is a bit up in the air at the moment. I'm starting to feel that working from home will be more of a permanent reality, maybe not to the same extent, but for many people into the future. People have worked out how to work from home. Getting the equipment set up.
Yeah,
so
and
I
some
think
people,
that's
yes, and some people will be getting quite good at what they are doing. The new changes they made, just as you mentioned, people are getting really good at how they operate things digitally, and if people had a new hobby and they might want to continue pursue that hobby and turn that into something more permanent, and people become more comfortable, not only just comfortable, but they are quite confident of the new change, the new culture, and the future that this new culture that bring to us.
That's right. And I think that many of us are part in this adaptation stage,
I would say too.
and they got their leg in the earlier stages. And I think this is a good time to start planning for the future with your life focus, because things will be different once we forever in many situations, work-wise. The economy will be very different. Who knows what happens with the money side of life? It's going to be very troublesome, but also an opportunity for many people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you. I would say even for me, I am sort of in between. Yeah, the stage of you try to adjust. I feel like I was just getting so used to accept everything and become really comfortable, and I'm having lots of hope of this new change, what this new change will bring to me. However, it's very interesting that this another stage, which is the re-entry stage. We are actually discussing this topic in a very timely manner because we experience this new culture of stay at home, keeping social distancing. But we are seeing things are changing again. The restrictions are slowly being lifted, and people's lives are slowly getting back to what they used to be like. And I guess then people all have to experience a new stage of re-enter their life back to where they were. Do you think they will have a little bit of re-entry shock?
Absolutely. When you go back to your office, you might have not seen it in months, and it's going to feel very odd, like coming back from a very long holiday. And I must say, it's okay to have these shocks. It's very normal. So just remember that if you are feeling a bit funny at the moment, that's a normal reaction. If you're not feeling funny at the moment, if you're feeling like everything is completely fine, then you might not be aware of some of the changes that are happening around us. Or maybe you just stayed at home normally. This might not be as big a change for you.
Yeah, exactly. I guess this is the stage that most of the people have to start to experience next, is to go back to what their life used to be. And as the stage indicated, that in this stage many people might feel emotionally detached, and everything that was once familiar is now all strange again. And you might even find yourself criticizing your own previous culture and having difficulty in connecting to people. So for example, I heard on the news, even though now the restrictions are being eased and people are encouraged to start to go back to work. However, people start to really criticize, like, oh, I can work from home, why don't I just work from home? There's no need to go back to how things were like. And it's also it's a very good hygiene practice to keep washing your hands, and if you're sick, really stay away from people. Those sort of new practices that people are getting so used to, and they will go back to start to criticize how things were like in the past.
Yes, and at this stage, you realize that your culture has been fully transformed.
Yeah, I like that word, being transformed. So it's really lots of knowing for lots of people, and for people to really go back to reconnect to people. There will be some effort that you have to make, and emotionally to yourself, to really accept that this is all normal. This is just another stage of a culture shock we are experiencing. And if you look at this stages again, I'll say it just looks like a cycle. So you are not necessarily just stay at one stage for your whole life. You will go through different stages, and they might jump from one stage to another. You might skip some stages. However, it is just very interesting to know that things will go bad and things will go all better again.
Yes, and it's a testimony to humanity to adapt.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you so much for joining us in this discussion part. And we would like to know your stories in terms of adapting to this new type of culture in this difficult time in our life. And thank you so much for all your support, listening to our show. And we are looking forward to being with you again next time. Have a great day.
See you, everybody.
We welcome you to check other shows on CMS 91.1. You can visit our website on www.cmsradio.org.au. You can also join our Facebook page and Instagram on social media. We appreciate all your feedback and encouragement in forming my little culture shock community. This is Sabrina. See you next time. Welcome to my little culture shock. This is your host Sabrina. In today's show, we are examining a culture shock that our community media stations are facing. Under the trend of digitization and the pressure of competing with dominant national media sources, community media stations are potentially undergoing a decline in popularity. We will also take a reflection on how print media has influenced the generations and where it is taking us today. I have my co-host Paul to join me with my discussions. Welcome to my little culture shock, Paul.
Thank you, Sabrina. It's great to be here.
It's very great to be here. And this is only the second episode of our show. I thought we are still wanting to help our listeners to establish an understanding of what our show is all about. As our name suggested, our show talks about cultural aspects. The word culture in our show covers not only the cultures from different nations, but more importantly, it refers to the cultures within the local community. Especially with CMS, our radio station is a local radio station and we are very proud to serve our local people. While some recent culture sparks our radio station has been experiencing is a change in people's consumption in local media sources, such as our CMS radio station. It is reported that dozens of regional newspapers and media outlets across Australia will close temporarily due to the coronavirus outbreak. Australian community media said some community titles would offer limited coverage online. It is understandable that some non-daily newspapers will cease publication in print and online for the foreseeable future. While some numbers here show that the jobs in radio stations have declined by more than 30%, and almost 40% print journalist jobs have disappeared. While it was more of the part of the suffering due to the COVID-19 outbreak, people in the industry started losing jobs. But that wasn't just a factor that it was the coronavirus that contributed to this kind of outcome. So for your opinion, Paul, what do you think might be some of the factors that contribute to this sort of outcome of the decline in the newspaper and the radio stations being cutting back on the jobs and also the coverage?
Yeah, well, it's first of all, just say it's disappointing. And you'd think that there is demand for local media. People are more aware than ever and interested, and they're searching for news, they're hungry for news. So you think there would be demand for local media that could be met. So it's odd, and I think one way of thinking about this is that those local newspapers make their money not from when you buy the newspaper, but from the advertising. And I think that's where they're feeling the biggest pinch at the moment. If the advertisers aren't paying money to be in the newspaper, the numbers aren't adding up for them. And while they call in Australia, or especially around New South Wales, while they call it local media, a lot of these newspapers are actually owned by big national companies. So they definitely have people who are in it for the profit. They're not in it necessarily just for the love of the local community, or I'm sure they've got plenty of people who are passionate about that. The numbers don't add up, and they've got shareholders, they need to make a profit, and that's going to come at the expense of their major expense, which is journalists themselves. And really, it comes to a point where if you're going to cut back journalism so far, that you're going to not have a newspaper. And I think they've come to that conclusion and just temporarily shut down for now.
Yeah, you mentioned a very good point, which is it was the journalists that they cut down, the jobs they cut down. It wasn't the fact that they have to really cut back on the media outlets and the community media station. It was more the jobs. If most of the journalist jobs are gone, and then we don't get that news sources from some of the media outlets. And it is true now when the COVID-19 pandemic hit the nation, when they first started to cut jobs, they would start cutting back jobs from the regional area rather than on a national level. So all the regional media stations and the small community media stations, they are the one who had to suffer the first and had to suffer the most. While fortunately, we are very proud to tell you that with our station CMS, we are volunteer-based radio station. So that means all the broadcasters and the hosts and producers who are involved in our radio station, most likely we do this for our passion. So even with the pandemic, even with job cuts, there's no way that we will cut our passion in talking to you and in broadcasting all the great news to you and talking about stories with you. So that is definitely a concern that you don't have to worry about, even though you read the news that some regional or small community media might be affected. But we are very confident to let you know that we are still here and we stay very strong at this time of the year. That's very good point you mentioned with the journalist and the job cut here. But when you first read this news, I wonder how shocked are you? Do you want to share a little bit of your personal experience and your opinion when you first received that news? And do you have any personally love with some community radio stations or community media?
Yeah, so definitely hearing about these newspapers have been printed in some cases for nearly 100 years. So it's definitely very saddening for something like that's in a public good like journalism to be stopping. My personal experience is that I remember growing up and there was a local Canberra paper called The Chronicle. It probably wasn't that very high standard, but it did include little local articles that I did find interesting. They might have been talking about a new park that was being built, or there was some fete or festival on. It was very down to earth, low key, and in fact it was the kind of news that made you feel better, as opposed to some of the more international dramas that are playing out now. They're not necessarily nice stories that you get to hear about, but in your own community there's good stories happening every day. But without local journalism, it's going to be harder to hear about that.
Interesting. That's very good. I also heard the other day people start to complain that it is just so easy to know what Donald Trump had for dinner rather than to find out what's really happening in your local community. The sense of something very personal, something very local, that's a really good point of view how you really take on the local media stations. And I do believe the relevance the local community stations really get to offer is really valuable. And the local stories need to be told, and also the locals need to have their voice to be heard. When you just talk about the local newspaper, And when you read all the local news there, and they are very relevant to your own life, so really bring you and that media station really close together, that you can really share something that you both witness in the local community. And I think it was that type of relationship we really need for the local media stations to really nurture the local community by offering something, very local, something, it doesn't have to be very major, it doesn't have to be very big, but something that very close to you.
What I really miss as a kid, a young adult driving around Canberra, is the diversity that I could find on the radio. And I would tune in and find interesting shows on different radio stations, including CMS, which had plenty of engaging shows that I really found unique and interesting. I remember being more interested in finding something on a local radio station than I was listening to necessarily the big international music hits or the international news at the time. So I really miss some of that these days, especially because I'm not driving around. I don't have the chance to surf between the radio stations.
Yeah, you just reminded me that when I drive, when I ever tune in a radio station, when I actually heard a word that is something so local, might be my local supermarket like the Coolman Court or the Canberra Centre or Targonal, if I just heard the words is like that, just really draw me in. I just really want to find out what's this all about. It really, as you said, make me more engaged in their show rather than something, from the international news, something I feel like, it is too far away from me, it's not that relevant. Yeah, exactly. So definitely our local radio stations has our place, and we really appreciate all our listeners to give us all the support and to be with us and to keep us company, and we really appreciate all your time you put into to be with us every week at this time of the day. Okay, so thank you so much for tuning in my little culture shock. This is your host Sabrina. In next session, we'll take a reflection on how print media has really influenced the generations and where it is taking us today. Welcome to my little culture shock. This is your host Sabrina. In today's show, we will examine a culture shock that our community media stations are facing. Under the trend of digitization and the pressure of competing with dominant national media sources, community media stations are potentially undergoing a decline in popularity. In this section, we will take a reflection on how print media has influenced the generations and where it is taking us today. I have my co-host Paul to join me with a discussion.
Hi Sabrina, hello everyone again.
Thank you so much for staying with us. Okay, just like part of a show, we like to put a little bit of fun fact of some cultural elements in our show. And in today's fun culture part, we'd like to tell you some fun stories of the very first newspaper. So the very first newspaper, we'd like to go through some stories of how the first newspaper was created. Without me having to start telling you, can you have a guess? What do you think the time and the historical setting might be?
Well, it must be recent. Newspapers sound like they're very recent, maybe 100, 200 years?
Yeah,
I'm just kidding. They go much older, I'm sure.
Yeah, but if you can imagine, the very first newspaper was actually published in Rome around 59 BC. In 1605, the first printed weekly newspaper to be published was called Relation in Germany. So the publisher was actually the son of a priest and his wife. He was an apprentice bookbinder and later worked as a bookseller, a scribe for a newspaper, and as a print shop owner. Because of these professions, especially his job as a scribe, he held good relationship to postmen and traders, which really helped him later on to create the newspaper relation. I guess, because the purpose of the newspaper is really for people to read, so you really shouldn't ignore all the people who get involved in the process, such as the postman and the traders. So he was really smart to make friends with those group of people. And the relation is recognized by the World Association of Newspapers, as well as many authors, as the world's first newspaper. And there were daily news sheets created by the government that contained information for the public. It usually had political news, military campaigns, trials, and executions. They were first written in stones or metal. Later, they were handwritten and distributed in public forum or read from scrolls by the town criers. Still, early civilization did distribute news. So, for example, in China, one of the earliest form of news media was created as early as 202 BC. These were palace reports or imperial bulletins distributed by the government and intended for bureaucrats. Any news for public consumption might have been distributed by a posted announcement. So basically, the forerunners of modern day posters. Well, those were very interesting facts about newspaper cultures around the world and its evolution of the newspaper culture. So, Paul, would you like to share what interests you the most?
Wow, there's so much interest there, Sabrina. The story of the Romans, it kind of makes sense that they were one of the first people to have a recognized kind of newspaper coming out. I know that they were very big they had a very big empire, so they not only had to move troops around, but they had to move information around, and they had to rely on a lot of commerce. So a newspaper makes, or some kind of newspaper stone tablet thing makes perfect sense. Interestingly, it wasn't until 1600 years later that we had like a regular daily printed newspaper in Europe, and that seemed like a big gap to me, which is interesting. But I think you mentioned the town crier, and I'm guessing that the town crier, who was essentially a big someone who's employed as a loudmouth just to walk around up and down roadways where the houses are and announce the time, announce the news, and any other important information.
That's very interesting.
It's a shame. I don't think they have any paid town criers left, but it's kind of a shame because that would be an interesting way to get your news. When you wake up in the morning, someone might be shouting it in your window.
Well, I can definitely imagine that, and I almost have this picture in front of me. That's actually very, very interesting. That just reminded me of this type of culture when you are just so close to your local people. It's almost like, there you go, your neighbor is here every day at this time of the day to give you a daily update on what's going on. And it is cool. It is cool. And I can imagine that town crier must have had a really good voice so that he could really reach lots of people and lots of people could really hear him.
Yeah, and everybody have the same kind of news, so you could talk
Yeah,
with your neighbor.
I
Oh,
know.
he said that today. And if you didn't like the news, I guess you could shout back at the town crier.
Wow, it's very much like how now with the social media interaction, how someone posts something. But I guess at that time, it's not all about how interesting your news was. It was more about how loud, you can really get your voice through, and how the louder you were and the wider audience you could really reach. Of course, you get some feedback. So rather than people really comment online to leave it all quiet, I guess it must have been really noisy just to get the news out.
Yeah, quite fun. And it'll be interesting if you had competing town choirs at the same time. I'm probably sure they didn't have competing town choirs, but these days we have competing newspapers, competing TV channels. But you only try and listen to one at a time. But that's just a funny thought. And what I'm also interested about is that the distribution of these media was very local. So the news would have been local, and it would have been very freeing for the people to get this information, because we take it for granted, the amount of information we have now. We've got so much information around us every day that we're exposed to, and it's very cheap. But back then, to get a piece of news or information would have been very special.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, I really enjoy learning this part of the history. And yeah, you're right, that town crier really got my attention, and it was really, really interesting. And what interests me the most was the content they cover in the oldest newspapers, such as they mention the political news, the military campaigns, the trials, and the executions. While it didn't really sound like a lot of everyday life events, they did showcase the context of that particular historical setting. So just depends on based on the type of news they were telling everyone. You can basically guess, what was really going on at that time.
Yeah, they so much gossip you could talk about.
Yeah, especially with political news there. And as you can see, the print media, now we are referring to the newspaper, definitely has a long history, and it has played its significant part in informing the people with news and entertainment. For me, I had some really fond memory with the newspaper. My dad worked in the local newspaper station, and my house was never short of newspapers. I remember my dad would bring tons of newspaper from work for him to read every day. Of course, to take advantage of the easy access of newspaper, I also spent lots of time reading the newspaper myself. I can still remember the feeling of holding the fresh printed newspaper in my hand and smelling the strong ink. I particularly remember when you get them freshly printed, the newspaper was feeling actually quite warm. So that's when you know. And I really enjoy. I remember, that's right. I was telling my dad, I just want to touch. I want to touch the really warm. I want to touch the temperature of the freshly printed newspaper. Yeah, so I knew it was almost like, I got the headline news at the first place. And sometimes I rub my hands and my sleeves on the newspaper, and my hands and my clothes would get all very inky. And sometimes if there was a very special article I really loved, I would cut it off and stick it to my diary to save it for later. And when I save a certain paper for a long period of time, the edges of the paper become this yellowish color. So there you go. I had lots of very fun memories, and it's almost like something I could have a personal relationship with. And I guess the relationship some people developed with the newspaper has become a certain tradition in their lives. So, for example, we can talk about for some generations in society, the printed paper-based newspaper was still their favorite, still their love.
Yes, and there would have been some of those papers in Europe would have been running for many hundreds of years.
Yeah, so can you tell us a little bit of your personal experience with your family member or another older generation that you know, particularly really into newspapers and really see that as a tradition?
In our household, I grew up with the Wednesday and the Saturday Canberra Times coming to the door. And the Saturday Canberra Times, that was an exciting paper growing up. You know, there was no internet. TV wasn't always on. But yeah, the Canberra Times, it would have so many sections. It was so big. You buy the Canberra Times now, it's like a small little magazine kind of shape, but it used to be what you call a broadsheet newspaper, and it used to open up and split into several sections, and there was something in it for everybody. These days, the newspapers are sort of targeted a particular market, you know, but in the old days, it had kids sections. And,
wow, that sounds fun.
Yeah.
It was almost like did you feel like it was like a family event on the weekend when the newspaper first arrived in your house and everyone was just so excited to really find out what's been happening of the week?
Actually,
Tell us a little bit of the story.
Yeah, you'd bring it in and you would be excited. There would be the sports section. I'd rip out the sports section. So I could read that first, and other people could rip out the section that they wanted. There was even a TV guide in the paper that you couldn't get the TV guide anywhere else other than the paper.
Yeah, that's right. So definitely you can see how lots of excitement just from that paper-based newspaper. And that's what I really love about our show. We talk about the culture, and there you go. It's almost like it's your family tradition, it's your family culture to read like a Saturday newspaper of the house.
Yes,
in the household.
It was a cultural tradition going up to read that. Yes.
Yeah, and do you feel like you miss it? And next we'll be talking about some advantage and disadvantage of the the digital news and stuff like that. But from what you just described, did you miss that type of culture the newspaper has brought to you?
Definitely, because it was, as you say, a family experience. You share things. These days with the internet, it's very targeted, which in some senses is great because you're getting something that you want. However, you're not going through the social process of bargaining for who's going to read the part of the newspaper first, and then you're reading the same information and you can talk about it with your family and reflect upon it. Now you can have family members, they're getting the information from all sorts of different sources, which is fine. It probably creates more diversity.
But it's just everybody on their phone instead.
But they're probably not engaging with each other, or they don't have necessarily the same commonalities with that. So yeah, that cultural element has gone now of sharing that news.
Definitely. I guess with digital news, it just has so many advantages that everybody talk about. It's bit sad that sometimes, people forget to talk about all the great things about some traditional newspapers and some old traditions that, start to really die off. I think it was very important that every now and then people would take some time to really look back in their life and think about all the great things the old tradition had really brought to them, not only to appreciate what's really new that been happening, but also to create a sense of this great memory that to really cherish everything the society had to bring for us.
That's right. Yeah, you get to reflect back, and I kind of really miss getting the paper coming in. I believe the Canberra Times is still in circulation. Maybe I should go out and buy one.
Yeah, and that's a very good point.
Not that I'm trying to advertise.
Yeah, well, talking about advertising, I think I, as the host of our CMS radio station, I would like to really advocate our show to really encourage our listeners to please do not give up on us, and please stay with us and almost take it as a type of culture of your own household to tune in at this time of the week and to really stay with us. And we really, really enjoy your company. I think that's all what we have for now. I know time is going really fast, and we are a half an hour show. We had to squeeze everything all together. And but don't worry, we have more coming up for next week. So we are so looking forward to be with you again next week. Welcome to my little culture shock. This is your host Sabrina. Today, we are going to have a chat on the latest culture shock you and me might be getting. You experience culture shock when you get to visit a new culture. That's pretty obvious. However, today we're talking about the culture shock where you don't get to visit a new culture. More specifically, we are talking about the dilemma that we are left facing due to the current travel restrictions because of the global pandemic. So this might sound really strange to you. You may wonder how you would even get a culture shock when you don't even get to see another culture. Well, at My Little Culture Shock, we discuss cultures among the nations, but more importantly, we discuss cultural experiences that we form in our daily life. So in the previous show, we talked about the 5 stages of culture shock when you visit a foreign country or a foreign place. That include the honeymoon period, where everything just is so exciting and so new, and then you move to the second stage where you have the adjustment and you get to adapt to the new culture, where you sort of struggle and negotiate some of your own culture within the new culture, and then you rediscover this culture and then really eventually set into this new type of culture. So just to follow this type of cycle again, we are going to have a look at this type of new culture we are experiencing recently. So as always, I have my co-host Paul to join me today to have this discussion with you.
Hello everybody, I'm Paul and I'm looking forward to discussing with you, Sabrina.
Thank you so much for joining us today. So first of all, Paul, we would like to have a look at what traveling was normally looking at before the pandemic. And as you know, the reason we really pick the travel scene is for most of the people in their understanding, when they get to witness a new culture, they really get to travel. They really have to physically move from one place to another. So tell us what travel was all about to you before the pandemic.
Well, I think this is such an exciting topic, Sabrina, because it's so relevant to us all. We used to associate travel with a kind of leisure activity, and people would want to travel to get new cultural shocks as they go overseas. And that's what people did. People were fascinated and talk, oh, I'm going over to this country. Oh, what were those people like? What was their culture? It was a fascinating place of interest that really stimulated the mind.
Yeah, so basically people will go travel just basically to, to just have a look at what other culture practice are, and to really get to see some new thing that is different from your own motherland.
Yes. And there were also cultural shocks. You'd go visit maybe a family member in another country, or for international business meetings or a government meeting. There was lots of travel for that. Even people not looking for a culture shock were still having to travel overseas to see family and do business, and experiencing all sorts of cultural tales that become part of themselves.
Yeah, you pick some really good ones. Some not only just travel based on people's choice, they get to pick a day, or opportunity to travel, but also some essential traveling you mentioned about, like such as traveling for business and traveling for meetings, and I would consider like visiting family. That's something quite essential too. You really have to move from one place to another place just to achieve those goals. Like those things won't even happen unless you make a travel for those type of things. Yeah. And what other essential travels can you think of that people used to do?
Well, it's a bit more of an economic thing, but Australians used to travel the world for work, particularly Australians with maybe engineering skills or skills in a particular like finance industry. They used to travel the world, often to developing countries, and work there,
Yeah.
And while they were working, they would experience all these, and they'd be there maybe for 6 months, a year, 2 years, or indefinitely. And that kind of employment travel just is, well, we'll get into that later, but people used to dream about, I'm going to spend a year working in France or something like that.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just employment. People would also study. Many universities in Australia have an arrangement where they have a sister university overseas, so you can study a year in that sister university and get credit as though you studied at the home university. And there's an exchange, like a student exchange program between universities that was really popular. And none of that, well, I can't go into details of that, but it's not happening now.
Yeah, that's another very interesting one, is people travel for study too. It's really, about achieving some of your career goals, like for work meetings, and just basically to even not only to really to seek for another culture, but really to accumulate your own experience, and to really accumulate the type of like skills and you are going to need for your future career and things like that. And those sort of traveling sort of really needed. You need those sort of travel for you to really complete some of your goals for your life. Yeah, that's a very important point. And apparently, as you first mentioned, people go for leisure, travel for holidays. That's, I guess, almost like a routine, will be like a built-in routine for most of the families. And we know now the school holiday is coming up. On a normal school holiday with kids, they don't like to stay around in their house all the time. Parents like to take them to go visit a new place. So that type of family holiday to really, not only to really get to see another place, but also is that type of to escape from your own current environment to a new environment where kids get to have a bit of refreshment. So when they come back from the school holiday, they are all recharged and refreshed and ready to take on new things. Yeah, isn't it? So isn't that fascinating? How much we not only needed the traveling to happen, but also how much benefit traveling really has brought to us, to our life. Yeah.
So true.
So those points now, unfortunately, sounds like a bit of past dream we used to have. But now let's talk about some of the reality on what travel is really now at the moment. So based on the guidelines and the news from the government, so we have very strict travel restrictions under the because of the global pandemic. So at the moment, traveling domestically is could happen, but it's very limited. So for example, only some states where you get to really visit, some states their borders are not even open yet. And for people who want to really enter Australia, only Australian citizens, residents, and immediate family members can travel back to Australia. And all the travelers returning from home from overseas are quarantined at their arrival place in a facility such as a hotel for 14 days. And if you are to leave Australia, there is actually a ban on Australian traveling overseas. And the Smart Traveler travel advice is level 4, where you do not travel overseas. So basically, it's a no on the traveling overseas. However, the exceptions will include for those citizens who usually live overseas and where the travel is very essential, and where the travel is in the national interest or on compassionate or humanitarian ground. And regarding to travel to Australia, Australia's borders are currently closed. Only Australian citizens, residents, and immediate family members can travel to Australia. For quarantine for arriving travelers, since 29 since March 2020, all travelers arriving in Australia by air or sea must be isolated in mandatory quarantine accommodation for 14 days from their arrival, with few exceptions only. After the mandatory quarantine, they can transit domestically and travel home. And travelers are quarantined in the city they arrive in for 14 days, even if they don't normally live there or plan to travel somewhere else in Australia from there. So, as you see, the current travel restriction is really basically no travel, because for our definition of travel, I don't know how you would define travel. How would you define traveling? Because for me, I feel like traveling has to involve internationally. If you don't that's even most people will understand like My Little Culture Shock, that kind of culture has to be among the other nations. If you don't even get to travel internationally overseas, that's not even considering as traveling. So would you even considering that as traveling if you just get to move around within your own state or within your own area?
Yeah, it's a very good question. The world seems to be getting kind of smaller where you can travel.
Things are getting better for sure. The restrictions have been lifted slowly, but at some stage we even feel like traveling, like even from going for a walk in your local shops or having a bike ride around around your local blocks is even considered as a traveling. That sounds quite interesting, isn't it?
Yes, definitely.
Now, those are the fact that is happening right now under the new restrictions because of the pandemic. We are not able to travel like how we used to be able to travel from one place to another. Now, let's just talk about the type of culture shocks we are actually really getting out of it. We are just going to take a short break and we'll come back to discuss more on the current culture shocks we are getting due to not being able to travel. Welcome back to my little culture shock. This is Sabrina. So today we are going to talk about the new type of culture shock we are getting lately due to not being able to travel. People always consider getting a type of new culture shock because they are able to travel, they are able to see a new place. However, today we're talking about the type of culture shock you are getting for not being able to travel. So I have my co-host Paul here to have this discussion with you.
Hello all, my name is Paul. Good to talk with you, Sabrina.
Thank you so much for joining us. This might sound very strange to you that, not being able to travel means not being able to witness a new type of culture. Then where do you even get that type of culture shock? Well, that's exactly what we are getting to next. We already learned all the travel restrictions and things like that. So basically, you can't really move that much.
Well, that's right. And I can't go to Queensland, Western Australia. Not that I was necessarily planning that. But
Yeah.
I know that I'm stuck in my house.
Yeah, that's right. So with apparently the internationally the border is closed, and with even traveling interstate, it's not that easy. For example, people can't even go to some states in Australia except for New South Wales and Victoria. So it's really like people can travel, but they can't really go that far, right?
Yeah, it's definitely, even if it's allowed, it's sort of discouraged
Yeah.
on a level.
Yeah, so I'll consider that's a bit of shock to start with, like not being able to travel far.
Yeah, so it means that you're less likely to meet different people, have those exposures, those cultural shocks that you were usually expecting.
Yeah, so you can't even, you basically just interact with your local place where you just stay locally. That's right. And since you mentioned not being able to interact and see another different culture, and I would call that is a type of culture stagnation where you actually give your culture experience a little bit of pause. Would you agree with me on that?
Oh, that's interesting. A very good point there, because maybe what makes things progress is all those interaction of cultures, and we're not getting that as much as we used to. So we're getting a kind of cultural stagnation, and the cultural stagnation is, well, it means some things aren't changing. I'm not necessarily learning new concepts about the world. I might believe that my way of thinking is the only way of thinking in some respects, because I'm not being challenged like I normally would, perhaps.
Yeah, that's right. Because usually you get those stimulation from seeing and experiencing and interacting among a new type of environment. Not be able to travel really put a stop on you for not being able to really experience and not being able to think and to really see. So it's a bit like yeah, it's freeze in you to even think about a different kind of culture, and that's something quite new, and I guess lots of people probably not very used to, because we are living in this very dynamic type of world, and the world is changing so dramatically, and people used to move around so much, and people get overwhelmingly were getting lots of new information, new type of culture every single day, and now it's all wow, having a pause on what you are actually really getting.
I think pause is a polite way of putting it.
Yeah, let's see where we go. That's right. Yeah, that's another point. Another point is, since we talk about not being able to really interact, that's a type of culture isolation we're talking about.
Cultural isolation, yeah, that is where, you might think about some tribe in the Amazon forest that hasn't been contacted by the outside world yet. And now there's people who are a bit like that. The outside world is not necessarily engaging with these people. And if someone doesn't want to turn on their TV or computer, they are isolated.
Yeah, that's right. And we don't deny the development with the technology. Like, we understand there's TV, social media, and technology to really help you to still get to see lots of new things on TV. But really, for me, I think if you really get to learn and experience a new type of culture, you really have to put yourself into that place. Really get to see things on TV and see a picture or watch a video. Well, that's not really you absorbing the type of culture. Sometimes I feel like I really need to smell the place. I really need to be able to touch everything to really get that feeling that I am embracing this type of culture.
That's
So,
right. You've got to live that
yeah,
culture.
yeah, exactly. So even though it might feel like with the help with technology, we were getting more, but we are still very isolated. We are not really out there to really experience all those culture. We are isolated in our own little area, restricted, not being able to travel.
That's right. And it's really that feeling of isolation can be a bit of a culture shock in itself.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Does that concept work?
That's
because
right.
you feel isolated. It might be the first time in your life you're feeling like this, and
Yeah.
that can be a shock,
That's
just
right.
as a culture shock is.
Yeah, it can be even applied to like individually, where a bit of loneliness, not being able to have the company from others, not
Yeah.
just relate to the type of culture, but also it's just like for personal comfort. That sort of isolation is not very nice. Yeah. Moving forward, we talk about how when we go to a new place, we see different things, and those type of different things we were talking about, that it actually refer to the type of diversity in this world. Being able to see new things allow you to get to witness the diversity of life of the world. So now, not being able to move from one place to another to actually just see those type of things is really reducing the type of diversity in our life that we can experience.
That's right. And so many cultural, sort of social cultural events have been cancelled, if you don't mind me bringing this up, because for some people, it's been a big change. It might sound like, music festivals used to be a thing. Now they're being cancelled.
Yeah.
That kind of cultural thing. Movies can no longer be made at the moment. Large-scale gatherings are not occurring. You can't have those big firework festivals with everybody huddled around on New Year's Eve anymore.
Yeah.
The can't go necessarily into crowded art galleries and things like that. So all these things have meant that there's been reduced, I guess, locally produced culture, adding to that reduced diversity.
That's right. And just how you mentioned is just the amount of options we're left having. It's really not that much. Like when we talk about, culture can also refer to like as you said, or the music festival, or the art and the creative industry. And now we are not able to get to be able to really get as that much.
Yeah. I should bring up that as I understand it, the government has introduced some funding for the cultural sector. That basically, the package apparently will deliver some more money. I don't know the details of it, but it should.
Yeah, the art and creative industry definitely need lots of support due to how this industry was really not going really well under the restriction for not being able to, not just the pandemic, but also just not being able to travel, because people actually travel to those different places to enjoy all those creative experiences. Yeah, that's definitely a shame. That's definitely very unfortunate regarding the spreading the diversity that we sometimes need to be getting in our life. And next thing, since we talk about the moving from one place to another, and we talk about not being able to move too far, so people become more like locally focused on their small and local community, become more inward looking than we used to be.
Well, yes, that is almost like a risk or a danger.
Yeah, tell us about it.
People associating less with their part of the world, they can look and think, oh, they're not part of me. I can't even go see those people in Europe or Asia or America or Africa. Maybe I'm more Australian. Or even I think people are seeing themselves in we see people talking about, they're not talking about being Australian, they're talking about being, I'm a Queenslander.
Yeah.
I'm a Tasmanian. They talk about themselves by their state. So even the Australian national identity is breaking down as people look more insular in towards themselves.
Yeah.
And now people will be thinking about, oh, I'm not from just the state, I'm from this city or suburb or street.
Sort of,
it's all coming
the
much more
scale
insular.
how they define themselves as a group is really narrowed down, even smaller and
that
smaller
perfectly
now.
summarizes it.
Yeah, that's right. And even though you might even define yourself belong to your identity has changed to even smaller group, however, you might still have your families who are still overseas, and it is just a pain that you're not able to visit your overseas family member. And for me, for example, I'm not able to see my parents who are currently in China. They used to visit lots, and we used to visit them quite often too. And now it's really a question mark when we even get to have a hug with them.
That's a very sad topic.
Yeah, I know. So I would say that type of culture shock is the type of homesick you can get from not being able to travel, not being able to see your families.
Can you describe some of the emotions associated with being away from a family member or even your most loved one?
Yeah, absolutely. So you miss home, you really miss them, you miss the touch, you miss the hug, you worry about them, you miss the that you're not able to be in touch that frequently, even though with a video camera it's not as the same. More importantly, I think it's this uncertainty that personally I feel like, it's the uncertainty. I'm not able to plan my future, putting my family in China there with me. I don't even know when I'm able to see them. And if my family member ever gets sick in China, the thought of not being able to be there to really care for them is really devastating to me. Yeah.
Oh, that
And
must.
talking
Thanks for opening
about
up about that.
yeah, talking about the family member, we can also just add the last one is for people who are family, but also for people who have relationships. And imagine if you have your significant other have to be separate, have to be in another country, and who currently can't even be reunited with you due to the travel restrictions, and you will be having this remote, distant relationship, which is can be really heartbreaking to some people.
Totally heartbreaking.
Yeah.
That depressing subject, but maybe there'll be some light at the end of the rainbow if they can see each
Yeah,
other
we
again.
really hope so. We really hope so.
Let's hope and pray.
Exactly. As we said, there are lots of sad facts. However, we don't want people to lose hope. Sounds like we talk about lots of like a negative part of the culture shock. And just as we said, the fact that it is uncertain always give us a sense of hope as well. We don't know how long this will last. And maybe at the end of the day, just as we talk about in our culture shock cycle, at the end of the day, we might even get used to this type of new culture shock that we recently received, because this is something new and we all juggle our way to really figure out the best way to work things around. But as people start to really adapt to this new type of culture, and we have lots of hope that people would start to really embrace this culture and make this culture type of their own life, and really make things into all the positive things.
Well, that's a good way, I think, to sum things up.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Now the time is really running fast, and we are just getting to the end of the show. Thank you so much for being with us today. We hope our discussion really inspires some of your thinking, and we are looking forward to be with you next time.
That was a great discussion today, Sabrina.
Thank you. Bye.